That's Titus, and I'm Thomas, and this is Everyone is Bad at Magic, where we untap, upkeep, and punt. So, Titus, over the weekend, I was kind of running a little bit of a thought experiment, and I put together a deck with you in mind, and I was hoping to share it with you, see what your reactions would be live. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but that's a little more fun for me. So, I call this Jund to Conclusions. It's Dargo Rayhan. Uh, if you wouldn't mind bringing that up. This is my take on a turbo slanted Dargo list. I know that Dargo has been pretty popular lately with Timna specifically. It took down Fishbowl last week or the week before as a Mardu deck, and you being a bit of a Mardu pilot yourself, I figured you're pretty familiar with that deck list. For those who don't know, Dargo is 6 and a red for a 7/5 legendary creature giant pirate. And as an additional cost to cast that spell, you may sacrifice any number of artifacts or creatures, and this spell costs 2 less to cast for each permanent sacrificed this way, and 2 less to cast for each other artifact or creature you sacrifice this turn. And his partner, Rayhan, is black and green and does not matter for any other reason. So, Dargo math is weird, but it makes it a very fast deck. Uh, the reason I want to kind of share this with you is because I think that Dargo's a really cool commander with cards like Greater Good, where you can sacrifice a creature and draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. There's also a sorcery that does something similar called the Life's Legacy for 1 and a green, where you can sacrifice your creature and draw cards equal to its power. And then there's a bunch of different Dargo loops in the list. Just first thoughts. Is there anything that stands out at you? Would you like me to run through any of the lines? Do you even like Dargo as a commander? I took kind of a swing on this one.
So I do like Dargo as commander. However, I would be looking more at maybe Rograk, because Rograk might be a little bit easier to utilize. Dargo seems like has great combo potential, but I don't know what I'm doing with the giant to try to lead into the wins. Though it is a great sacrifice or burn offering. Looking at it, I would like you to explain some of the lines, and I could understand why it's not in here, but where's Minsk and Boo?
I mean, I don't think there's room for Minsk and Boo, if I'm honest. We're already cutting down to about 22 lands. I feel like 21 would be irresponsible.
Can't Minsk and Boo put counters on Dargo, though?
Why would you want to put counters on Dargo? Oh, Minsk and Boo reads you have to sacrifice a hamster in order to get those draws, so you would need to have a way to make Dargo a hamster. But I do like where your head's at.
Yeah, why don't you go over some of the lines? Like I said, yeah, this definitely be something I'd be interested in trying out, but there are sometimes lists that I'm not quite the best at knowing what to do with, so why don't you break down some of them for us?
Okay, so the main way to play Dargo as a mana battery, at least with how I built this deck, real Dargo Pirate players, please feel free to leave a comment telling me how wrong I am, is essentially we want to make Dargo cost a singular red and then find a way to recast him over and over again by sacking him. There's a couple different ways to do this. The two main ones in my mind are always going to be Bergi, God of Storytelling. Whenever you cast a spell, add 1 red to your mana pool. So every time you sack Dargo after your initial cast, you get to replay him for free off of the red mana you make from Bergi. The additional sack of Dargo pays for the commander tax in this case. You also have Relic of Legends, which acts in a similar fashion. Now, the easy way to win off of this would be having something like a Mayhem Devil, which makes it so that you can ping down the table. You can do the same thing with a Goblin Bombardment, just for quick pings. The deck also works on a different axis where you have an Altar of Dementia for a very similar loop, but instead of pinging the table, this lets you mill either yourself or everybody else every time you sack Dargo for 7 mana. Does that kind of clarify the main meat and potatoes lines for you there, Titus?
Yeah, and the other great thing about this list is shifting woodland.
I'm a sucker for shifting woodland. I think that's the coolest land. I run it in too many decks.
As it should be.
The other really cool thing about this Dargo list is that it kind of takes advantage of any treasures that you can produce. So we get to run some cool things like Warren Soul Trader and Shatterfang to make as many treasures as we have life. We also have some really cool things like Impulsive Pilferer. Whenever you sack it, it dies and creates a treasure token, which reduces our Dargo by 2 while making a mana. And a personal favorite, I believe we shouted it out last week, Treasure Nabber. So if we steal all of our opponent's rocks, we can then sack them to cast Dargo, which is kind of mean, and I like it. So I don't know. Feel free to take a look at it a little more deeply. I'll put the link to this list in our show notes if anybody else is interested in it. And please feel free to give us some notes on how you might make this better. Obviously, we're on things like breach lines with our grinding station, but I'm sure that this is just a first pass and could be made quite a bit better. Cool. So, we're going to jump into our main topics today. If you listened last week, this is going to come as no surprise that this is a little bit of a two-parter. And we're going to start off by talking about the updates to the bracket system. So, the changes to the bracket system seem to be more centered around the idea of when you should be winning the game, which feels like an interesting concept because the turns that they assign to each of these tiers feels a little bit aggressive and like maybe a little more powerful than I would have expected. Have you looked at this document at all, Titus?
Not the new one, the prior. Why don't you give us a little bit of a breakdown?
Well, if you're looking at bracket one, generally you should expect to be able to play at least 9 turns before you win or lose. Previously, this was mainly considered the expedition tier, where you could play decks that were focusing on like every card has a hat on it. Or I'm playing my tiny little shrooms deck where every card is a mushroom. It was pretty much made to play dirtily decks that didn't really do anything. Bracket 2, now we're generally expected to play at least 8 turns before you win or lose. Previously, this was considered the pre-con tier. One of the big differences here is they've acknowledged that there's a pretty wide gap between what is considered a pre-con these days, with the old school pre-cons that might be a little janky compared to the modern ones, and the Secret Lair ones and the Modern Horizons ones, which are pretty heftily upgraded at this point. Bracket 3, they're saying that you should be able to play at least 6 turns before you win or lose, which that is wild to me that casual decks are planning on winning on turn 6. Previously, this was the upgraded pre-con tier, where you would just be able to swap out a couple cards. This is also where we're starting to see a couple of game changers being added into the brackets. And bracket 4 being optimized decks where you're now expected to be able to play at least 4 turns before you win or lose, which that should be no surprise. That's where we're starting to see stacks and turbo decks and whatever degenerative trash magic people want to play. No changes to bracket 5. So, with those changes, maybe oversimplified as they may be, any thoughts?
Yeah, I appreciate that they're putting time into refining the bracket system. And everybody, every time somebody leaves feedback, right? Like, what about this? Or what about that? Or should this card be on the game changers? Or how many game changers should actually be on there for people to keep track of, which will be something to note later. Uh, but I do think the brackets are a nice loose guideline that can be improved over time. I do have a question for them about the bracket system as well, though, is how are they kind of determining these guidelines? Like, are they just basing it upon what they see in surveys or reviews? Are they getting feedback from, you know, from internal testers or people that work within the company? Is this from the rules committee? Who's implementing the bracket system? Is this just WotC?
This is from the commander panel at WotC. So it is the panel that they announced with the public list of people that you can look up in the bracket, or sorry, on the announcement page. They all signed it, so this is not a faceless committee. They did cite community feedback for a lot of the changes that they made.
Yeah. Um, I do think that it is probably going to be something that will continue to grow and develop, uh, hopefully getting a little bit better each time, and everybody will have their opinions on the matter. One of the things I think was the game changers. Some people thought Trouble at Pear shouldn't have been on there when it was put on there, and then other people were like, well, they took it off. Why should they have taken it off? It's too strong. I think, like, even with these salty cards, right? Or say cards that may have received bans, everybody will have a thought or opinion, both positive and negative. And I think that's all good as long as everything is civil.
Before we jump too far into the game changers, Titus, I did have a couple thoughts on the brackets themselves and the new bracket system as compared to our old numbered system. When I went to MagicCon Vegas earlier this year, it was kind of astounding how ubiquitous the bracket system had already become and how much it had solved a lot of game mismatches that were, I mean, pretty much commonplace when it came to playing Commander with a pot of people who you'd never met. So, overall, as just a casual player in a space with a bunch of strangers, I would have to say that overall it felt very successful. So, I'm interested to see what it feels like with these changes, if they are going to be implemented by the wider community the way that the bracket system was originally. Because I found it very helpful to find games. And when I brought out my bracket 2 that could punch up to a bracket 3, it always felt good to be able to have those conversations in a framework that people understood, as long as they were respecting the idea behind a bracket instead of the letter to the law. Because if I was to say bring a Wheelie Odd deck, which technically is a bracket 2, into a bracket 3 game, I would still probably feel like I was pub stomping that pod, because even though it fits the letter of that bracket, it's really tuned to be a bracket 4. Have you had any experiences playing within the bracket system as it currently exists?
Uh, not entirely. I've had some recent gameplay, and I don't even think that we necessarily brought it up even. Um, for gauging like kind of what people would bring out, I think it was just basing it on the games. And I think with like you said it was MagicCon, right?
Mhm.
MagicCon, you have a lot of people that are probably more up to date and following the bracket system, following just Magic content uh, and announcements overall. And when it comes to like locals or people just meeting up, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's probably something they may not be following as actively or paying attention to, but it is something that's good and it does create a conversation that you can have with the people that are either new or being introduced or even your own play group. So I'm definitely not saying it's a bad thing. I think it's probably something that will grow over time. And yeah, as far as you were saying with like the bracket 2 to the 3 and how a deck functions, like I said, kind of not really with it, but it did give me like a game kind of like deck building basis, right?
Yeah, it becomes a puzzle.
Yeah, it gave you an active conversation to think about your deck construction, what you're including, how you want the games to be, and if they turn out maybe being underpowered and you thought like, okay, well maybe I can go a little bit closer to this or that kind of a thing, maybe like bracket 3, maybe I can bring this uh, up a bracket 3 or it's too strong. I might be wording this this one poorly, but you kind of get the idea, right? Like, hey, maybe this is too much for a bracket 2, but do I even need game changers? And I can say, like, I don't need game changers because the deck draws this many cards without those pieces and it functions like this, or it can win on an earlier turn, right? So I think overall guidelines, even if they're not exactly being followed, give players kind of a basis to deck construct to play their games within. I think it's overall good. Whereas before in the past, when you had the scale of 1 to 10, right? Everybody's a seven.
Yeah, and I think it's super important to recognize that point is now we have common language. And we were kind of lacking common language. So it's super helpful to have at least a starting point to have this conversation at that's not as nebulous as it was.
Yeah.
And I can say that I've put together a deck in each bracket so that if I go out and play in the wild, I have something to play in any pod I want to sit down at, or at least I have a deck for each bracket that I want to play in. There's no way I personally want to play in a bracket one game, so I don't have one. And if that's the pregame conversation, I'll just go and find a different game. But you know, there's always that level of knowing yourself as well.
Yeah. It's just good overall guidelines, whether you want to adhere to them or not, or how you want to approach the conversation. I think it overall is a good thing that over time, will be adjusted and changed like anything, right?
Exactly. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit before we moved on to the cards that we were about to get to, the cards that got removed from the game changer list, because there were several. A couple of these, I don't know if we're going to have big thoughts on. There was Expropriate, which is 7 and 2 blue. Starting with you, each player votes for time or money. For each time vote, take an extra turn after this one. For each money vote, choose a permanent owned by the voter and gain control of it. Then you exile Expropriate. There's Jin Cataxia's Core Augur. That's the one where at your end step draw 7 cards and each opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7. Sway of the Stars, which is the 10 mana. Each player shuffles their hand, graveyard, and permanents into the library to draw 7 cards, and each player's life total becomes 7, essentially restarting the game. And then there's the ones that I think we are going to have a bit more thoughts on. But did you want to touch on any of those before we move on?
Yes. And I feel like people are not too keen on expropriate, as I can say a word. And I can understand why, right? You said the effect was either players give up a permanent or that player takes an extra turn, which an additional turn may not always be the strongest, but that means maybe they got a dead card draw off the top of their deck and they were able to go into another turn with something better, or they maybe could take whatever resources they had and just leverage it even better. But you're having additional players voting on this. And the other thing is too is if they're in a good position, just that accelerates the game plan a lot. But it is a lot of mana to
I
cast.
was 100% going to say the same thing. Because, well, you're right. That is a very, very, very powerful effect. It's 9 mana. 9 mana sorceries should win you the game.
But, and I agree with you. I agree with you. If this card's being cast, it probably should be leveraged to winning the game. However, it seems like a late game card, right? But honestly, there are cards that are very mana efficient that I don't feel like they break the bracket system. Like let's look at Thran Dynamo, or is that the one? I think it's a 4 cost artifact that taps for 3 maybe, and then you can also play like uh Voltaic Key. I'm not saying we should be looking to maximize certain effects, but it definitely could. And there's, even if it's not like the most like Goblin Welder kind of stuff and cheating stuff into play, 9 mana is relatively reasonable even earlier.
9 colorless mana is relatively reasonable. seven colorless mana and two blue is less reasonable.
High tide.
I'm saying that for you to play a nine mana sorcery, you should be winning the game. If you're being able to make nine mana, that game should probably be coming to a natural conclusion soon. I'm
I
sorry, that's just not a hill I'm going to move on.
what was the next one? Was it Jink Attack?
Jin-Gitaxias Korarger. That's eight and two blue. This one's a little easier cheat in.
It is, but it's a creature, and I I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion in regards to it. If you have a thought vessel or a reliquary tower, you're fine.
I mean, I have seen this card come out a number of times, never in casual, but this was a Hashaton special for a minute. And I will say that this has never stayed on the board for a full turn rotation. So I've never had to go down to the one card in hand, so I'm
I,
not super worried.
I will say I have played in a casual game against a Sire of Insanity, and I did not enjoy that at all.
That's fair. That's
Yeah.
fair and reasonable and understandable.
Yep. Yep. All right. What's the next one?
Sway of the Stars. It's eight and two blue to restart the game with everybody's life total at seven. I think that's unfun, but go and live your life.
Yeah. I don't have strong feelings. I'm sure that somebody could abuse it or use it very in a unfun way, but I don't have strong opinions on this one.
Yeah, and we already talked about Vornaclex last week.
Yeah.
It's the six mana, two green that your lands tap for double. Uh, so the next four are all commanders that got removed from the list, and I'm very shocked at two of these. First one's Kinnan Bonder Prodigy, which is Simic, non-land permanents. When you tap them, add an additional mana of any type that they produce. Then for five generic and a green and a blue, look at the top five cards of your library and put a non-creature or non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield. Urza, Lord High Artificer, two generic and two blue. When it ETBs, create a 0/0 colorless construct. Uh, that gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Each artifact you control taps for a blue mana, and five generic to shuffle your library, exile the top card, play it till end of turn without paying its mana cost. Winota, Joiner of Forces, two generic and Boros. Whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, look at the top six cards of your library, put a human creature card from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until end of turn. Put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in random order. It's a 4/4. And finally, Eureka. One in Demir, and it has Commander Jujutsu for Demir. Whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to that card's mana value. It's a 1/3. All right, so Kinnan. Oh my goodness. Um, I would go so far to say that I think this might be one of the single most broken cards in Commander. Um, I got to play this in a tournament somewhat recently, and it was my first top 16. Um, and I attribute that purely to this just being a truly broken commander card. Um, I don't know if I agree with this coming off of the game changer list. I don't know if anybody's playing this in casual, but I don't really think they should be. Any thoughts?
I I am actually okay. So I know that these decks can be made fair, right? But I do think all of these commanders, especially as you're saying, Kinnan, could have remained on the game changers list. Kinnan is just very efficient, right? It's like Elf. I mean, you can any rock, right? You're just accelerating your game plan, and sure, there could be a good amount of removal in a casual game versus CDH. But yeah, Kinnan just is a overly strong card that also gives you an effect to play or cheat in a free creature, or you just cast it with the mana produced off of Kinnan.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think Kinnan and Yuriko can kind of be spoken about in the same breath here, as I think both of these are hard decks to build poorly. They might not necessarily be CDH when they are built poorly or not optimally, but they're not going to be bracket twos. They're not going to be bracket threes just based off of their commanders. You would actively have to try to build them badly, which is why I think they probably belong on this list still. The old saying is like you can't build Yuriko as a bad deck. There is no such thing as it's not that Yuriko deck. It's always that Yuriko deck.
All it takes is Yuriko to do the damage, right? to
Yep.
get to get a flip. And I am I'm interested. Maybe they just wanted game changers to be delegated to non. Are there any commanders still as game changers on the list? I don't think so, right?
I mean, technically, Braids, Minion could be a commander,
Yeah,
and technically Turgid, God of Fright could be a commander.
they stay on there. It, yeah, it's like a weird place, right? Maybe they just wanted for these cards to be off of there so you could have additional game changers in your deck. But if they're gonna leave two other cards on the list that can potentially be played as commanders as game changers, why wouldn't they just leave these on the list? I'm interested behind the thought process of like maybe why did they want to take these off? Did people have some negative opinions or
Yeah, I don't know who's clamoring to say we should have Urza and Winota, two notorious stacks decks, coming off of this list.
that's a bracket two, right? Those are bracket two commanders.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love playing against Winter Moon in my bracket two Urza list.
I mean, you could do a gimmick, right? Like it's Urza with just foods.
Do we need to build that?
It could. I mean, it's not on the game changer list anymore, right? So, I mean, yeah, if you look at it right, if we look at Turgrid definitely being one of the salty cards and being, I mean, don't get me on the VV. Nope, no, no, not the same. um, but if you look at like Braids and Turgrid, they definitely have a very unfun effect. Whereas the other commanders can do stuff that could be unfun, but it's not necessarily inherently in their like build.
They're just generically strong. I agree with you. They're not like toxic. Okay. The other two cards that came off the list. The first one's more surprising than the second one. Deflecting Swat, which is two in a red. If you control your commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. You may choose new targets for target spell or ability. The second being Food Chain, which is two in a green. Exile a creature you control, add X mana of any one color, where X is 1 plus the exiled creature's mana value. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells. I'm not terribly mad at Food Chain coming off because I do believe that value Food Chain can be a thing and can be cool in the right decks. But I was under the impression that free counter spells were just game changers, and Deflecting SWAT is very much a free counter spell in my mind.
The
I would
redirect,
put that right there with Fierce Guardianship.
the redirect.
Potato, tomato.
um, I can see the logic you're coming from. I don't. It's a strong card, right? I don't necessarily think it stops something. It can be annoying because you can redirect something to something else. I don't know. It's hard to say. For these, like I understand cards like say Vampiric Tutor being on the list, right? Go get whatever you want. It's a very strong card. And even tutors can be used to get silly things, right? And do silly things. But it feels like with deflecting swat, Well, it is a very nice protection piece, especially if you were building, like, say, a mono red commander, or compared to like the other colors that may have better protection spells, maybe outside of mono black. I think they only really have like Withering Boon and Imp's Mischief. But like mono red does have redirect spells, but I don't know. I don't feel strongly. If it was still on the list, I'd be okay with it. I I don't know. How do you feel about it?
So the reason why I think that this would still be on the game changer list, and obviously this was discussed way more at length by the commander panel, is I know that they're not necessarily discussing signposts, at least not publicly anymore. But if you're sitting down at you know, a bracket three table, one of the big signposts that you're looking for is open mana before you go ahead and make your play. And it's essentially one of the things that you should be able to expect is if you are playing a spell into a tapped out board, that it will resolve. It may be killed later, it may be destroyed, whatever, but the spell will resolve initially. That's why I was under the impression that all of these free counter spells were on the game changer list, so that if you're sitting down, you can expect that experience, unless your pre-game conversation referred to, hey, I have game changers, or this is a bracket, high bracket three, low bracket four. We can expect 2 to 3 game changers, or whatever that may be. In which case, you're playing blue, you're playing red. Cool. I expect free counter spells at that point. This is essentially saying that this is an okay card in bracket 2, which I find concerning. As far as food chain goes, I said it a little bit earlier. I think food chain is just a cool design space to explore in. Yes, it can be broken with cards like Squee the Immortal, but you need to have 1 to 3 of those cards which are not in its color, and you need to have a commander that can also be an outlet for your food chain. And there is such things as a value food chain, where you can just use it as a ramp piece, which I do think is a cool way to use the card.
Yeah, I agree. There are things you can do. So that's the problem with some of the cards designs, right? They can either be utilized in such a way where you just do some very efficient combo-tastic things, or you can use them kind of like to do cool things, but you're not fully taking advantage of the card. You're just finding, like, say, oh, okay, I played this one creature and maybe I have an exile deck that does something, or maybe I just, can leverage that creature into casting some other cool sort of effects. Now, it'd be great again with an example, but I do think there are ways to utilize cards in a more fair manner, and I think that kind of goes within the spirit of deck building within each of the brackets, right? And what your intentions are to do with them. Not to say that niche cases don't come up, but yeah, I agree with the thoughts on that. Now, I know Trouble in Paris also came off the list. How do you feel about that one?
I really enjoy Trouble with Bears. I think it is a very cool card design. Would you mind reading off Trouble in Pairs if you got it in front of you?
So, Trouble in Paris. 2 white pips and 2 generic. Enchantment. If an opponent would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead, and whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, draws their second card each turn, or casts their second spell each turn, you draw a card.
I think that this is one of my favorite white draw pieces. Um, it's not hyper efficient, so it does not go into, every CDH deck or whatever. But I do think it is a good piece for casual. I think it can flex into the right CDH list. And I have had one of those beautiful moments where I was playing against Narset, Turns Narset, uh, where I had a Trouble in Pairs out, and it just turned into a hard lock because they couldn't combo off with their extra turn spells. And that felt really, really good. This card also always draws you more cards than you're expecting because you get each of the individual triggers for each opponent. So you can draw as many as 6 cards in a turn, which is pretty insane. That's magical Christmas land, don't get me wrong, but when it happens, it feels pretty good. Any thoughts?
Yeah, the combat in casual outside of CDH seems like a primary way that it may be drawing cards, and it was also in the Go deck from Murders at Karlov Manor, correct? So, yeah.
I believe you.
It was in the Go deck, from Murders at Karlov Manor, which definitely seems to be a thing, right? Having players attack with their goaded creatures. As far as like the additional draws or casting second spells, I don't think we're going to get the level of interaction of a CDH game. I know some people think that, it may draw too many cards, and how many cards reasonably in a game should you be able to draw at the lower bracket levels before a card is problematic, right?
I mean, it's a 4 mana investment that's not going to hit every turn. This is going to draw a lot less cards than Ristic Study. It's probably going to draw less cards over the course of a game because it comes down a lot later than your Esper Sentinel. That's why I'm not too worried about this not being on the Game Changers list anymore. This didn't come off this past wave. I believe it came off the previous one. And I don't think that anybody's really been missing it terribly from that list. It certainly isn't a card that they are looking to ban, uh, which they did mention too that they are looking at and discussing with the community. We did talk about those a little bit more in depth last week, being Thassa's Oracle and Ristic Study. Did you have any thoughts on those, or did we kind of beat that horse?
Heuristic study, I don't think they will, right? There's so many people that would have ownership in how many copies with variation art they have out there, but they could do it. Um, I don't know. It I think that one card, I think I would be okay with it definitely being a banned card, right? And I own a copy. It's not like sure, I may be more frustrated if it's if I had like a more premium version, like the Stay With Me from Final Fantasy, or I believe the anime from the Wilds of Eldraine, the anime from the Wilds of Eldraine. But if it stays right, I think this is a card we can always look at within a conversation. Um, I don't think we could propose like the extra game changers, different title than that, right? Where these cards are upgraded, where it forces you into an even higher bracket, and then we expand the bracket system from like 1 to 7.
It's so funny that you called that the premium versions. In my mind, it's like I got my prophecy version, and I'm looking at the prices, and it's like the cheapest one, but that's the one I really love. The like old school one with the old school border. I would not actually mind seeing Ristic banned. I don't necessarily think it would be particularly good for the format right now, but I think if we were to slip back out of the turbo meta for CDH specifically, that it would not be healthy for CDH. I don't necessarily think people like playing against Ristic Study in casual pods.
I think this is going to relate to a previous conversation, at least from like the casual aspect. It may suck if somebody's drawing a bunch of cards, or may not be the best if somebody's drawing a bunch of cards, but from a CDH standpoint, I think the real thing that bothers me, because you could play a stacks deck, you could play the cards that limit card draw per turn, where somebody only gets an additional card. However, there's a card that preys upon the creature versions of those cards, and it starts with an O.
We're not talking about Orcish Bowmaster again. I refuse.
That's my point there. Is that I think that in CDH there could be more natural opponents to this card. Possibly, I could be wrong. If there was another card to see a ban, I don't feel very strongly in regards to Ristic Study. It would be an interesting shakeup, and it might be bad. It may be bad.
Yeah, if we were to thought experiment outside of the card that we have both acknowledged that we would like to see banned, I would be more interested in potentially seeing banned as partners. Not necessarily banning the partner cards, but banning as partners as a mechanic.
Yeah, and we can approach that conversation a little bit further in the discussion.
Okay, heard. So, speaking of banned cards, is there any banned card you would actually like to take off of the list?
Because I bought some copies per Medieval Titan.
Okay.
No,
That's a hot take. I don't know if Commander would really benefit from Primeval Titan, if I'm honest. That is, I don't know how familiar you are with the modern deck, but that seems ruinously difficult to play when you only have 60 cards and you can have 4 copies of each. I'm not sure that would be the most fun deck to pilot. Wait, that's not a legendary card, is it? So it couldn't be your commander.
no, it can't be your commander.
What are we doing with primetime in EDH then, Titus? Why do we want unbanned? What decks does that go in?
I mean, look, it's landfall decks. I mean, you could use it just as another big creature to get a special land that you're looking for within your play. I don't know. Was it banned immediately in the past, or was this card allowed to see Commander play? I'd be interested in talking to players about their experiences with it.
I genuinely don't know. That would be something we'd have to do a research on to figure out when it was banned in Commander.
I got my pick. A card that I would like to see unbanned outside of Jeweled Lotus because I think that card within Commander should exist. Would and I don't think it's that bad, but again, I could be wrong. Would be the card that I would like to see unbanned is Lutri the Spell Chaser.
As a companion or just only to be played in the 99?
Uh, to either be played as the 99 or as the commander. Take away the companion ability.
I think that'd be pretty cool, but that
Yeah.
would require a pretty heavy errata. That
Yes.
might be arena only, unfortunately, where
See,
they
and
do
that
the alchemy cards.
yeah, that's a further conversation with any of this stuff, and we'll actually approach the topic. But I think Lutri would be a cool card to see unbanned. Would it be good? I mean, it copies an effect, right? It go infinite pretty easily, and I think it has flash. Does it have flash?
It does have flash.
Oh yeah, it'd be pretty good. But it'd be Lutri. I could see where that card could be easily abused. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it would be cool to see the otter come back. But is there a particular card that you would like to see unbanned?
So outside of our most recent bans, because I'm definitely on record saying that I would like to see Mana Crypt come back. Just because I do like the drama of the card, I like the explicitity of the mana. I actually think I would like to play with Tinker in the format. It's just a better transmute artifact. I'm sure that it would lead to maybe some powerful play patterns, if we will. But I think it would be very cool to be able to tinker away your, let's say, I don't know, your talisman for chromatic orrery. Maybe that's a little too powerful for our format, but I do think that that's a cool card in a cool space. And while we can't obviously do like Flash moving forward, I do like show and tell type effects, and I think of Tinker the same way.
Yeah, I've been so because of standard Kona Rescue Beastie in an Omniscience deck, or if you play the Golgari version, you can drop a Velgavoth. Um, a part of me has wanted to make a list. I don't think it'd be the best, but to leverage effects like Show and Tell, Kona, Abuelo's Awakening. There's a couple other ones that I was looking at as well for artifacts and enchantments, just to do something like that.
Let's be honest. They didn't ban too many cards in Commander, and most of the cards that they banned, they probably deserve to be on that list at this point. I would love to hear people's comments below on what they think should come off of that list that would be reasonable. But looking through, there's not too many that should come off, or if they did come off, they're not going to be like that much fun. I don't see what they actually add to the format other than they just don't deserve to be banned anymore.
So here's a question, right? And some of these cards, like we could completely ignore them, and some person might have one in their binder or their collection, being like, "Ah, I really want to be able to play this card," right? And that's fair and understandable. But my question would be in regards to, um, like, say we didn't have a ban list. How do you think that would affect commander play? Technically, at your kitchen table, you can do whatever you want as long as the other people are okay with it, right? Like, hey, we're playing unbanned commander, or we're rule zeroing this conversation. But how do you think it would affect it if, like, a good portion of these cards say something like Grizzlebrand?
So I don't think it's going to affect brackets 2 and 3 very much. I think it makes brackets 4 and 5 less interesting because all of a sudden every deck becomes 5 player soup. Every Mox needs to be ran in order to be the most efficient decks possible. Every deck needs to have Ancestral Recall. Every deck needs to have Time Walk. Those are just objectively correct plays at that point. Once we have Black Lotus, what are you doing if you're not playing Loris as a companion? So the card pool gets smaller, the deck slots get less flexible, and I think that getting rid of the ban list entirely homogenizes the format. So when we're seeing, let's call them who they are, the hyper rich people who have all of these cards playing no ban list commander, I think they're flexing. I don't think they're actually playing the best decks possible. I think that one of our current CDH decks could probably take down those tables pretty handily just with how they're constructed currently, unless they are truly, truly playing them as vintage decks, in which case, just go play vintage. Which isn't an insult. Like, vintage, it looks like an incredibly fun and healthy format right now. I would love to play vintage, but I'm not selling my car to do so.
That's fair. I think that's also a conversation like say somebody within the CDH spectrum. Within the casual, there might be some people who try to pull this stuff out to play, but realistically, unless they're just somebody showing off a portion of their collection, you'll probably won't see like any of the moxes, right? And there's even like a portion of these cards that we could say, okay, well, they're going to remain there. I think there's an open conversation about that, but I overall with a lot of the banned and restricted list, it's relatively understandable. Like one card though, I don't think it was put on that list because of how strong it was. It's Golos, and it was put on that. Yes, Golos. Yes,
Golos
it's a
is
strong.
crazy
Yeah,
strong.
hold on. Golos is strong, but it was more banned out of the fact that it was just a generic commander, generic 5 color commander that you can build however you wanted, Kenrith. But yes.
I'm not sure if I agree with you on that one, bud. I feel like that commander could go absolutely nuts. But if you want to try a deck building exercise, I'm more than open to it.
It used to be played in CDH. It it wasn't. I don't believe it was a dominant deck. Strong, but it was banned more for the casual. Yeah, I believe because it's just so pop. Like it was the easiest five color commander to make, right?
I'm gonna trust that you did your research,
Oh, don't trust that.
but I might ask around on that one.
This might be all subjective opinion.
There's one other point I want to make on no ban list commander before we move too far away from it.
Okay.
Um, we have a local player who I'm not going to bring up their name because I don't feel like it's necessarily, we didn't ask them. But they owned a Judge Foil promo or Judge Foil version of Gaia's Cradle that got stolen. And that is a ruinous amount of money to have stolen out of a card game deck, which is essentially what we're playing. If you have a Black Lotus or a Mox Pearl in your deck for real, and that gets stolen from your table, that's that's a lot of money. Like that's not something that you're going to be able to replace. The person who had that Gaia's Cradle stolen broke my heart for them. Um, I can't speak to who gave to the GoFundMe and who didn't, but I don't think it was fully replaced for them. I would feel horrible if somebody got their deck stolen and it had a full power 9, especially if they couldn't afford to replace them.
No, I concur, but I mean, aren't people when they go to these Magic Cons and other events, when they play the vintage, aren't they carrying around these actual cards?
Yes, and going to MagicCon with my Derevi list, which is by no means blinged out compared to a lot of other decks, I was very conscious of having a full paper deck with me. Just having like my regular full cards, I was very uncomfortable carrying that much money around. So I could only imagine how much that scales into legacy and vintage, or even modern.
Oh yeah, like it's just insane. Some of the prices of the I understand cards go up and down in prices all the time. There are definitely cards like the reserve list cards that are more stable, but a lot of these decks either getting close to a grand or more. Yeah. Uh and it's not the first time. It doesn't even have to be at the event, right? Like traveling around with this stuff, I believe there was a conversation where two players in the past, I don't remember how long ago, had their vehicle broken into, I believe, and their card stolen. I could be wrong. It might not have been their
No,
vehicle.
no, I remember that happening. It was in Seattle. After an event, they had it broken up. Their car's trunk was broken into, and their decks were stolen. Um, this should be no surprise to anybody, but if you are traveling with your Magic collection, just keep it on you.
Yeah,
No, yeah.
we can go to locals, and for the most part, if you have groups of people that you trust, uh, that's great. But at the bigger events, especially when there's a ton of people about, not to say that everybody has ill intentions, but it's just better to be safe than sorry, right? And to be cautious. So just be very watchful if you're traveling with your anything that you would consider valuable. Keep a good eye on it.
The panel is currently exploring us being allowed to or changing the rules behind hybrid mana costs. Whereas currently, if you're using a hybrid mana cost, you have to have both colors of mana in your commander's color identity. Moving forward, if this rule change was to go through, you would only need one of those colors in your commander's identity. So a good example would be Deathrite Shaman, which costs a black or a green and can only be played in Golgari plus decks. Moving forward, you could play that in mono green or mono black.
Not on Deathrite. They actually broke down Deathrite. Deathrite can't because of its activated abilities.
Deathrite's the exception, the one card I chose.
Yes, actually, yes. So I would you can look and see about correcting me on that, but the reason why is because Deathrite Shaman has an activated ability for either a green or black, and it is not hybrid in the cost.
That is a very good note, Titus. The real example would be for Manomorphose. So for 1 and 8 rule hybrid, you can convert 2 red or 2 green into any color that you would want and draw a card. So now you could play that in your mono red or mono green deck. This gives Blue Farm Manomorphose, which seems terrifying for their post Nas. Uh, I am sure that there are many upsides and many downsides to this. Do you have any thoughts?
Yes, 100%. So I'm not for the hybrid mana rule change. Oh yeah, no. Um, there might be people that look at this and say, great, it's cool to explore new deck building, and realistically, it is just giving another tool. But there's a relevant conversation here, and it's about the amount of information we track during a game. Something I'll touch upon again after we kind of go over the hybrid mana cost, but like the example of Deathrite Shaman, and again, we could be wrong, correct us if we're wrong, but Deathrite having a ability, each ability was saying pay a green or pay a black, and they're two separate abilities and exile a card. Uh, that is kind of confusing, right? Because you would think that this card could be in either black or green, but then you have to look at it further and see what the activated abilities are. Now, some people may have more thoughts about a commander's identity based upon the activated abilities. And I know it seems strange to say, well, that seems like unfair because you got Najila or you got Kenrith or Tazri, but I'm just not for it because it's adding another aspect to the game where we have to pay attention to even more card possibilities for certain types of decks. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't know. I'm not a fan for it. And it may increase what you could see within a deck, right? More possibilities. Some people do believe that it may be more homogenizing, just saying that you could run this set and said card in a deck, and why not just run that set and said card? And having more restrictions might cause you to seek out different opportunities of what to play, just because you might be kind of put in that position. But like, I think Beseech the Queen is an example where you could play either 3 black or you can pay some sort of combination of black or 2 colorless for each of the pips. So say like if you wanted to, you could do 2 black pips and I believe 2 colorless pips for 4 mana instead of 3. And I think because that card would also be considered, and I could be wrong, colorless as well, that could slot into any deck.
I think that that is a very reasonable take. Mostly what I've been looking at is kind of how this would work with companions. Um, because I don't know the card pool of hybrid cost mana cards super well. So that's where my head went to. And to me, this looks like, maybe this would make Gyruda kind of interesting in a bunch of more decks. Or maybe we could move Loris out of just some 5 color lists and see that uh, in more spaces. Or my personal favorite, Zerda, the Dawn Waker, break that out of its own deck and figure out a way to play it into something else that's also interesting. I think it's a cool thought exercise, but I don't have as strong a feeling as you do. I definitely would probably play around with it a little bit on my own to see what cards are in the pool, but looking through just a scribe follow search for cards with hybrid mana costs, I'm not seeing anything outside the commander or the companions that really jumps off the page other than Manamorphose as like that's something I'm really worried about.
And it's not a bad thing to propose something like this and get community feedback, right? They didn't say they were going through with the change. They brought up a possible change, and then a lot of people can give their opinions on it. Some people would be super for this and happy to see what comes of it, and some people are more resistant. if it happened, adjust and see how the game is affected, right? And if it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah, actually, I just saw a murderous red cap falls under this umbrella. I'm not too sure if I'm for this. Uh, that
Uh,
card's gross.
but yeah, as far as the hybrid mana goes too, and companions, this actually brings up an additional conversation. Now, a different format. A different format. Uh, Dual commander. They have, because it's smaller, banned as commander, and then they have a ban list. The reason why I'm bringing this up is more so. What about having in traditional CD or EDH commander? Uh, Banned as commander, right? And I think the thing is, the more that we have to follow, possibly makes the game harder to pay attention to or get into. And I could be incorrect on that, but the more we add, right? Companions, say they added even more companions.
I don't know how much I agree with that, considering we're already well past the information overload point at this point, Titus. We have, what, 6 sets a year? Spoiler seasons are overlapping sets that haven't even come out. We were getting Avatar sets before, or Avatar spoilers before Edge of Eternities came out this year. They've had us drinking from a high fire hose for years at this point. I don't think banned as commander versus banned cards is going to make a huge difference at this point. People who don't want to pay attention will not pay attention, and those who are heavily vested, so people who might listen to a podcast like this, will probably just be pretty okay with a small change such as this.
Now, somebody brought up a great point. I don't remember if it was Maldhound or somebody else, possibly from the Decked Out channel. But the amount of sets, it's great for content creation, right? But is it really great for players? Like they hit a demographic, you know, maybe somebody comes in and enjoys it, somebody gets an IP they want, but the amount of sets that we're going over, we barely get to enjoy things. It's great because you can look back at it and say, "Oh, well, I can pick up this and I didn't know that," but it's just overwhelming. I don't know.
Oh, it's completely overwhelming. That's one of the main reasons why, for years, I was limiting what I was paying attention to as far as releases go. It's one of the biggest reasons I dialed into CDH as hard as I did for the last few years, because I only needed to pay attention to maybe 2, 3 cards each set. Uh, because that card pool that's coming out every year, it's overwhelming at best. I can definitely empathize with that.
I think Banda's partner for Commander would be good, but it is just another thing of information, especially a new person, which I mean, there's always going to be a learning curve when you enter something to kind of get the dynamics down and to be led to the proper resources. But say, like, you cannot partner Timno with Crom, right? That'd be cool. That'd be great, especially for us that play within CDH. I don't think it's necessarily as much of a problem in casual. I could be wrong.
You're not. If you look at the data on EDH Rec, they are not. None of the partner commanders are particularly highly played. So that is, they are pretty much exclusively played in our space.
I think that is something that we could do. And some people may have to take some decks apart, but they could probably easily replace that with, say, another commander within the 4 color or 5 color pile if they weren't even really trying to utilize it. But let's be realistic. What are you using Timna Crom for? What is your deck doing if you're not trying to draw a bunch of cards? No, honestly, answer that question. Um,
I don't play Blue Farm. I think they're just trying to draw a bunch of cards and then jam a Necropotence.
or Tim the Thrasios, or I do love Rograk. I know that a lot of people have negativity towards Rograk just because it's a zero cost. But Thrasios, Timna, and I think Prom to some degree, I think it's more Timna and Thrasios or the offenders.
No, it's Rog, Timna, and Thrasios. Don't try to leave that little kobold out of there. Those are the three problems. Well, thank you, Titus. I think that's a good note to end on. Do you have any final words of wisdom you'd like to impart before we bounce?
Again, it's just a repetition, right? But it's the game is what you make out of it. There's definitely a lot of people who find fun budget brews and other stuff. And while the information comes, I would definitely say stay positive about it. You can definitely give feedback in a proper, respectful way. But overall, it's a pretty good game, pretty solid game, and I think that's why you're here listening to it. If you if you feel the same, right?
That this might be a pretty moderate take, but I like what the Commander Committee's been doing so far. I like that they've been very transparent and that they're communicating with us very regularly. I'm looking forward to seeing what they actually decide to do moving forward. And I appreciate that they've shown who they are and that they've given voices to people throughout the format who have different experiences. So, if you stayed with us this long, please consider giving us a like, follow, subscribe, or comment depending on how you found us. Be kind to each other, be kind to yourself. It's only a game.